Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. Welcome to a special series of podcast episodes in honor of the 10th anniversary of my first book, Grieving Parents, Surviving Loss as a Couple, published in 2014. To mark this milestone, I'm reconnecting with the same parents I initially interviewed for the book, offering a unique opportunity to revisit their stories and gain a deeper understanding of their journeys, now with the perspective of a decade's time. In recognition of October being Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, this series is dedicated to showcasing how grieving parents have coped with their losses and trauma over these years. These episodes aim to offer a long-term view of life after the loss of a pregnancy or an infant, providing comfort, insight and hope to those who may still be navigating their own grief. Additionally, I'm excited to offer Healing Steps, my audio course, at 25% off this month. Use the coupon code HSOCT24, I repeat HSOCT24, to access the course and begin your own journey towards healing. I've known Martina for 20 years now, it seems a long time, but 10 years ago, and this is why we're talking today, I spoke to Martina about the loss of her daughter Hannah. And this is part of the series on being 10 years since this book, Grieving Parents, Surviving Loss as a Couple, has been published. And so in this series, we're looking back over the last decade since we spoke last time. But first of all, welcome, Martina. It's so nice to have you and to speak with you again. So why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about your story and Hannah, and so to fill in people who don't know you about what happened in your life in regards to child loss.
Thank you, Natalie. It's great to be here and just spending this time with you again to reflect and remember. So Hannah was born in 1985 and she was my first one, and really a surprise baby, and we loved having welcomed her into the world. And after 12 weeks she got sick and we thought she had a cold, and but things didn't shift, and so we went to hospital and they did some examinations, and what for us as first-time parents was thinking, like, how do we deal with a cold, was the diagnosis with that she had a massive brain tumor and needed immediate operation. So from being parent, getting over the baby blues and trying to get into all the routines with a newborn baby, we were thrown into the deep end of, will she survive this or not, and what will happen? And so she had her operation and it was successful, and she bounced back within no time, and everybody called her a miracle baby. but we still had to wait for the oncology to find out what kind of tumor it was. And so back then, 85. So I know today, in today's time, that there are many, many more things that can be done. But, her tumor meant if it would come back, that they couldn't do anything for her because it was then inoperable. And so we had 3 months of bliss and living this miracle, and her beautiful soft being that she was. And then one day she just threw up, and my intuition knew the tumor was back. And it was something in her, that changed. Like I have a picture of her where I'm holding her and she's sucking her thumb. And the way she looked was just not out of this world. And I didn't see it because I was holding her. But when I later looked at the picture and, with the knowing of when that was taken and what took place in that moment, I just knew. And sort of, I don't know, I had these little deals with her and the universe, when she first went through, the whole thing. And I knew if she would have died, sort of then 3 months earlier, I probably would have not, I would have survived that physically, but, I don't know in what state I would have been. And so I always felt like she knew she needed us to get around to come to this place of acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And she did that so patiently, so we, the doctors then, gave us things to medication you get for draining fluids from the brain and all that. And we could take her home and have her home. And one of the doctors in the hospital knew me because I was working with disabled children before, and he knew that I was responsible around, the things. So we had everything to look after her at home. But it was, sort of that feeling from getting from her, okay, I wait until you guys are ready, and then I can go. And we came to that point, like where I could feel all her love and, sort of felt like I had given her all, and I could see it was time for her to go, sort of that it wasn't sustainable, and neither of us wanted her to be in pain or anything. And so we said, it's time, for you to go. And well, you are now in Switzerland, but, I'm here in Australia. So, and here's in January, the sun in Germany, it was a gray winter's day. And, I made my bargaining with the universe to say, look, if there is a place where she goes, and I know there will be, I need the sun to shine, and I need that bridge that she goes to the light. And so when she died really peacefully, in our home, and we were holding her, the gray German winter sky opened, and the sun was just shining where we three were sitting and, being and huddling together. And I think that's why we moved then to Australia, to be where the sun is, because, here I'm the closest to her. And so back then it opened all these gates for me into exploring life beyond the physical life, and sort of finding my pathway into spirituality and trying to make sense out of what seemed senseless, such a beautiful being, leaving us with 11 months then. But she gave us half a year to come to terms with that, and it felt right to let her go. And we took her ashes with us here to Australia, and in Australia you can have the urn and sort of do things with the ashes you can't do in Germany. And so on her 16th birthday, we did a ritual. We asked our children, who then, like a boy and a girl, who have been born 4 and 8 years later and always knew that they had a sister, big sister, that we would let go of her ashes and they could say their goodbyes. And then Klaus and I went to a very special sacred spot for us where we did the letting go. We couldn't when she died. We were so numb. We were so prepared, but yet unprepared for holding her in a ritual. And because we were so dead inside, sort of everything around us was bleak and dead, and we couldn't come up with something, that would celebrate her. And it was just being here in Australia, learning more about celebration of life and walking my path deeper into spirit world, that we then came up with something that was us and where we could let go in a meaningful and blessing way. And that was really interesting because when we let go of her ashes, I felt, some stickiness had left us. We always sort of said that she was free to go, but there was still that physical remain that bound us. And the trickiness of that. In Germany, I had a little grave for her because I thought I wanted to go to a grave to grieve. And then I couldn't go there. And then I felt shame and I felt guilt that I couldn't go there. And it was so much better to what we could do here and to find that freedom for her and for ourselves. But it was palpable, that letting go. And so, so that were our beginning with into parenthood and into these two transitions, sort of birthing a beautiful being into life, and then the other transition, the end of life, and we didn't think that would come so close together.
So this is a really special realization for people listening as well as for me, because in your situation, Hannah would be 39 this year. So your loss has been almost 40 years. So next year it would be 40 years. And if we're looking back, so when we first spoke, I remember now, it was 28 years, because it was obviously before the release of the book. But so now we can look back in a lifetime of what you have experienced as a mother, or both of you and Klaus as parents who had lived 39 years without the firstborn. And I think that's a real pearl to learn from you, to not say that this is the way to go, but to say, well, how did you do that? And especially in terms of the book Grieving Parents, we also spoke about the relationship. And this is part of that. But I also want to know from you, when you look back, you shared the life of Hannah and then the loss of Hannah and then sort of the beginning part of the bleakness. And one of the quotes that I have in the book, which is exactly what you said about the sun, which was, when the sun comes through the clouds, I know she's there. She's not gone. And that was so beautiful. I remember from our conversation that it found a place within the book. But take us a little bit through those almost 4 decades, like how has grief over the loss of your daughter shaped you, your marriage, your family? And secondly, how has your grief changed and developed over all those years?
Yeah. The relationship, it was difficult because we had so different ways of coping with our pain and how we had to, work out our own ways. And I guess that is, grief is very individual, and so Klaus went to work and he was busy at work, whereas I was at home and at home alone. So I had a lot of time that, where grief just could be there. But I hadn't done much of my personal work. I started, doing body therapy, which was really, really helpful to, not allow the grief to make a nest somewhere in my body. That's how it felt, sort of, but that I could bring it out. And even so, I couldn't talk, but I could move it out, or sort of bring it out of my body. And Klaus did the same. And we actually started that therapy when I knew I was pregnant, because I said to Klaus, I don't want us to put our patterns and upbringing, onto our, baby, and we need to work out, like what we don't need anymore, and how we have been parented by our parents. And so that was really helpful that we had that throughout the pregnancy, and we, sort of could continue that then. And that was really helpful. But it didn't help us to talk with each other. We could see the pain, but we were also the mirror of each other's pain. And there was a time where we suppressed that with each other. And it was, so Hannah passed away in 86, and 91 we sort of migrated to Australia. And there I felt I needed to do some more therapy, and eventually we did couple therapy, and where we came to that point of what we couldn't talk about, what we couldn't share. And, the therapist was a really gentle woman who sort of supported us in holding each other. And so then we could say what needed to be said, and hold each other in this, and cry the tears we couldn't cry, before. But it took, over 10 years to, 10 years to do that. And that again brought us closer. And then it was a shared experience. And 4 years after Hannah's passing, and we welcomed another daughter. And we always let her know that she had a big sister, who is her angel sister, who is looking after her from above. And, that, sort of she always could talk to her. And so she was much closer, because it was much closer in the time. And with her coming, there was a fear from inside me when I was pregnant that I would lose her again. So, and I could feel part of me, sort of my heart encapsulating, sort of holding on, for not wanting to go through that pain again. And I could feel that conflict of, the joy of pregnancy and then the fear parallel to that, that, and that was really difficult for me. And when she was, our second born was 15 months, she got whooping cough. And I needed to sleep with her to know what she was doing, sort of that she was safe. Like when she was coughing, I then watched her sitting up, in her sleep and cough and then lay down again. And that helped me. It was such a metaphor for me, is she got this, like she will live and she's strong and does it her way, and supporting her and in that way. So, but it took a long time for me to trust again, sort of that she will stick around. And she's now 35, so she's certainly sort of is there. And and our son too, he's 31 now. He's he has his relationship with her, and both kids are having their own intuition around Hannah. Like our son had a major jaw operation, and before he went in the theater, and I was driving him, he took a photo of Hannah. We have this family picture wall, and I said, why are you doing that? And I was aware of the date, but he wasn't. And he said, I just want to take her with me. And it was her birthday.
Mm.
And, for me to drive him, he was in his 20s by then, to the hospital where he had that operation. It was for me, sort of a repeating of going to the hospital and handing my child over. And I had a what's the word?
Re-traumatization.
Yes, that one. And the doctor, he didn't know what it was. And I said, I need you to know this. And then I told him what day it was and, what had happened. And he said, I take so much care of him. And, you will see in an hour, you can see him again. And as soon as he wakes up, you can be by his side. But I needed to go through that again, to see, that wouldn't repeat. And I was in the waiting room, and I was praying there for him, and I could feel Hannah at the feet of his bed, like she was in the, operating theater with him. And I think, he called her in, with taking the photo and, taking her with him in that way. And so there have been these moments of, recognition. She is not here, but in some ways she's always with us. So, and I found my peace with that, that she's not in that physical form with us, but, every now and then, sort of the sun is tickling me, or, I catch that light, and I feel grateful. I feel grateful for the little time we had, the mother I could be for her, and the mother I have become through our journey, and thinking of who would she have been now, 39, and along the way, even in my peace, but sometimes when friends go through milestones, they become grandparents, then there is the pain. It's not the crying pain, but it's a ping in my heart. And it's like, oh, I wonder whether she would have chosen to have children, what she would have, been, sort of what career paths or, relationship and all of that. And and I would have loved to see her in that, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps me with the kids, like my adult kids now, to step back and let them choose and hold their life. And over the years, it has taken a long time for me to, with that trust and letting them make the choices.
Mm. I want to, this is quite normal. I want to normalize that, because one of the things that I hear, and I have been hearing all those times that I spoke to people for the podcast, the way that the nervous system deals with traumatization in the case of an unexpected child loss, for example, where the nervous system gets traumatized, and the regulation of the nervous system is, we could call it chronically dysregulated, or is easy to be triggered. So if things have happened in such an extreme event, then fearing for your child who goes into an operation is quite normal. Now the question is, how do you live with that? And you found a way to live with that. The other question, and I found that really beautiful, the way you said, I didn't want grief to build a nest within me. I thought that was a beautiful description of what grief can be doing. And, the last few weeks I've been thinking about, well, what does grieving mean? And what part of our experience of the loss is maybe a sort of easily falling under the umbrella of grief, but it's actually something else. In my experience, for example, remembering or images that might be, what would my daughter look like? Or what would they look like, the twins together going to school? I sometimes have these, but I don't put that, in my experience, under the umbrella of grieving. I go and say, well, this is like remembering or imagining or missing. And missing is maybe closer to the umbrella of grieving than picturing what would they be like, what would they look like. But it's different for each and everyone. But in terms of that description that you had, I didn't want grief to build a nest. I think it's also a question: what are we gonna put in that nest? What does grieving entail? I mean, the reality is we are going to live the rest of our life without that child that we had at one point and no longer have in physical form. But in other form, we do have it. It's just, how do we parent a child that is no longer physical? How do we be a mother or father or parents to a child that is not physically here? So one of the things you also said as part of our conversation 10 years ago, you said, in terms of the relationship, you said the paradox of allowing your partner's responses and reaction and seeing it needs to happen at the same time as wanting to bang his chest and scream and wanting him to be what I wanted him to be. So maybe tell us a little bit how that affected your relationship. I mean, with you, as I said before, we have this vastness of years, of almost 4 decades to have a look at. How did that affect you and Klaus together in the partnership?
I became a childbirth educator, and I had to write, my final assignment, and I have written it on death in childbirth, like around, those early times. And with that, I did a lot of, research and things. And one thing I found was, that back then, because there was not that support, the beautiful work you do now and others in the area, that a very high percentage of parents either would get divorce or, one or both parents would get alcoholic. And I had that as an information, and we were talking about that, and that we didn't want neither. But we had to give ourselves the time in therapy, separately before we could come together and open, that pain and a deep understanding of that we both had on the Richter scale the same amount of pain, through the roof, but the way we needed to heal that or hold that was so different because we are so different. And I find that similar to, the 4 or 5 love languages. We each have our own language to share love. And if the other person isn't aware that me giving you a gift is my love language, and you want to talk about things, and we never come together, then we both think, oh, he or she is not loving me, and we need to understand that. And I feel that is the same in grief.
That's a great bridge to the love languages.
Yeah. And then it's to accept the other person in their grief language and open up about the needs. But my grief language looks like this, and I need you to check in with me 3 times a week, or whatever it is that I needed. And that brought us closer, again. And what has grown over the years is a really, really deep friendship with each other, and a trust that goes beyond anything in our physical world. And yes, we are changing into, the autumn of our years and everything, and, things, little habits become annoying and whatever. But we have this huge foundation that we have built with holding each other in our pain, literally, physically, and allowing each other to be seen. And I think, that is something I found in the beginning very difficult, is to be vulnerable. When Hannah died, I comforted, my father, my family, like who couldn't cope with that she was dying. So I was a superwoman and strong and comforted them, when I was so desolate inside myself. But yeah, and to let Klaus in on that, on the helplessness and all these feelings of not knowing how to express tears and grief, and to allow that in my heart, and to allow myself to feel fully. And when we could be that for each other, sort of that holding each other in that, and with nothing needs to happen, but just to be. I think that is what has grown our relationship to where we are now. Next year we are married 40 years, and I think 42 years together. Like in it's longer, than half my life. So it's yeah. And I can see it in our kids, or, when the kids were teenager, and brought, friends home. And they say, you have breakfast with each other, and then you have dinner also with each other. Things like that, that we would sit around the table and share meals and, chat about the days and or not. But, that was, our ritual. That's what we would do together. And so kids' friends love to come and, have that, sort of homeliness in a way. And yeah, that was really, really important, for me and for us to have that extended hold to our kids and their friends. And I feel through Hannah, like it opened a gateway of looking beyond the physical, the outer, like, and so seeing the gems in the rough cut diamonds, that came across, like our door, and the kids brought home, and supporting, bringing that out in their friends, and yeah, so, and a tremendous gratitude. I wouldn't change anything, like it's of course, I would have loved seeing Hannah growing up, into herself. And but and the gift she has brought with her little span that she shared with us has been a lifetime.
I think that's a beautiful place. And I want to gift you as to round this up with one of the last quotes that I've picked from the book that you said then at that time, which is sort of mirroring what you just said. And you said there, the experience with Hannah has opened me to love in a way that I never thought I was able to conceive or open to. This stays with me to this day.
And yeah, I would say exactly that again. Just 10 years on, that love, because more lived experience has come into these 10 years, has deepened, like I understand myself more, like there's always room for improvement and work in progress. So yeah, sort of to step back into the bigger picture and see love in that bigger picture, sort of when I have been knockerheads with my back then teenage son, going through menopause, like that really volatile time of clashing, and then stepping, sort of feeling that pain, the loss of the little boy who needs to go out and, fight to become this man and figuring things out. So I think, Hannah's loss has supported, this transition of, there are so many transitions, so if there's a transition.
Yeah.
And so that's the biggest one. And that supported all the little ones, all the little letting goes of the stepping stones, the milestones the kids had to go through in growing up.
Yeah.
And I had done that. So, when I was at that point where I don't know how to be this mother of a teenage boy or girl before him, but and then I could step back and say, you got this. You had a bigger transition before, so you got this. This is just one more transition, and sort of step into that love. And yeah,
growing into any change and any small losses that we have come with something new that we don't know yet how it's going to look like. Well, thank you so much, Martina. It's been a rich conversation, and I look forward to any feedback from other people who've experienced loss, whether that's short or long. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.